I was already in bed when my phone lit up the ceiling. Not a call, a text. The kind that comes past midnight when someone doesn't want to wake you but can't quite wait until morning. I rolled over, squinted at the screen, and felt something in my chest tighten the second I saw her name. Jake. My heat stopped working. It's really cold in here, I'm sorry for texting so late. I lay there for maybe 10 seconds, staring at those words. Outside my window, January had turned the world into something hard and still. The temperature had dropped past single digits 2 hours ago. I knew this because I checked it before I went to sleep. Old habit from years of working HVAC. You always check the weather before you sleep, because cold weather means someone's furnace is going to fail overnight, and someone's phone is going to ring. Hers was the only call I actually wanted to receive. I sat up, ran a hand through my hair. Looked at the clock, 12:47 in the morning. Millbrook was 3 hours north of me, up a stretch of highway that turned into two-lane road that turned into mountain curves once you got past the state line. I'd driven it enough times to know exactly where the road quality changed, exactly where the deer liked to cross, exactly which diner stayed open until 4 if you needed coffee and a reason to stop. I typed back. How cold is it inside right now? 3 dots appeared. Then, I can see my breath, I have 3 sweaters on. Jake, I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to text. I was already standing. I want to tell you I thought about it. I want to tell you I weighed my options like a reasonable adult. Called a 24-hour repair service, looked up plumbers in her area, told her to sleep in extra blankets until morning. I want to tell you that, but it wouldn't be true. The truth is, the moment I read, I didn't know who else to text. Something inside me didn't hesitate, didn't calculate, just moved. I pulled on my heaviest jeans, my thermal undershirt, my flannel. I grabbed the worn green jacket by the door that smells faintly like engine oil and something I can never name. I went to the garage and loaded the truck with everything I might need. Manifold gauge set, pipe wrench, electrical tape, a handful of common furnace parts I'd been meaning to return to the shop, a flashlight with fresh batteries, and the old metal toolbox that used to belong to my father. By the time I pulled out of the driveway, it was 1:03 in the morning, and the outside air hit my face like a closed fist. I texted her before I got on the highway. I'm on my way. She responded in under a minute. Jake. No. It's the middle of the night. You don't have to. I'll be there around 4. Keep the stove on low if it works. Don't use the oven. A long pause. Then, you're already in the truck, aren't you? I smiled at the windshield. Drive safe was the last thing she sent. Then, a minute later, thank you. I didn't respond to that. I just drove. And now I should probably back up because none of this makes complete sense without the part that came before it. The part that explains why a 31-year-old man who has to be at work by 7 in the morning willingly gets in his truck at 1 a.m. and drives 3 hours through January darkness for a woman who technically lives perfectly within calling range of a certified HVAC technician. Her name is Claire Navarro. She's 29, has dark hair she almost always wears pulled back, and designs logos and packaging for small businesses out of a rented studio above a used bookstore in a town called Millbrook. She moved there about 18 months ago, which means I've been driving that 3-hour stretch of highway more than I ever expected to when we first met. We met at a wedding. Not ours, obviously. Our friend Marcus was marrying a woman named Diane, and both Claire and I ended up at the same table at the reception. The table where they put people who don't quite fit anywhere else. She was there because she'd done the invitations and Diane insisted she come. I was there because Marcus and I had been friends since we were 11 and I was the backup groomsman if his brother couldn't make it, which his brother did, so I spent the ceremony in a regular suit in a regular seat feeling only slightly useless. She was wearing something dark green. She had a small smudge of ink on the side of her right hand that she kept trying to hide under the tablecloth, and I kept noticing anyway. We talked for 20 minutes before anyone else at the table spoke, and by the salad course I had made her laugh 3 times and was completely, quietly finished. I say quietly because that's the only honest word for it. It wasn't fireworks, it was more like recognizing something. like walking into a room for the first time that already feels like somewhere you've been. I looked at this woman with the ink on her hand and the way she tilted her head when she was listening, really listening. And something in me said, "Oh, there you are." She was also not single. That came up casually about 40 minutes in, the way those things do. She mentioned someone named Daniel, a trip they were taking in spring. I smiled and kept talking and told exactly no one what I was feeling, because what was there to tell? She was kind and funny and taken, and I was just the backup groomsman at the next table over. We stayed in touch, traded numbers for work reasons, and then just kept texting. Not every day, just the way some people do, the ones you meet and can't quite let go of. She'd send me something funny she saw online. I'd ask how a project was going. She'd complain about a difficult client. I'd complain about an old boiler. It was easy. That's the word that kept coming to me during that first year of knowing her. Easy. Daniel left 14 months after the wedding. I found out in a text that came on a Tuesday afternoon between two jobs. Just a few words. He's gone. I think I'm okay. Actually, I think I'm not okay at all. Is that how it goes? I read it standing in a parking lot with a wrench in my hand. I didn't call because she had friends closer than me, better suited for that moment. I just texted back, "Yeah, that's exactly how it goes. And then, you can call me if you want to talk." She didn't call that night. She did call the next night, and the night after that, and somewhere in those late conversations that stretched past midnight I learned more about who she was than I had in a year of casual texts combined. She moved to Millbrook 3 months after Daniel left. Said she needed somewhere smaller, somewhere she could hear herself think. I helped her move. Borrowed Marcus's van, drove up on a Saturday, spent 6 hours carrying boxes up a narrow staircase while she directed me with the precision of someone who had thought hard about where every single object belonged. At the end of it, we sat on the floor eating cold pizza, and she said, "Jake, you know you didn't have to do this." And I said, "I know." And she looked at me for a second, just a second, before she smiled and handed me another slice. That was 18 months ago. Since then, I've made the drive more times than I want to count. For her birthday, for a weekend when she said she was feeling low, for a farmer's market she mentioned once and then seemed surprised when I actually showed up for. Each time she'd say something like "it's such a long drive," and each time I said some version of "it's fine, I wanted to." Which was true, always true, but also incomplete, and I knew it, and I hadn't yet figured out what to do about that. So, the heater. January, 1 in the morning. 3 hours of dark highway in front of me and a woman at the end of it wrapped in 3 sweaters because she didn't know who else to text. I drove the first hour in silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the kind that settles around you when you're moving through the night and the road is yours and the radio would feel like an intrusion. The sky was completely clear, stars the way you only get them in winter, sharp and close, like someone had pressed hard with a pin on dark fabric. I kept my hands at 10 and 2 and thought about Claire in her apartment above the bookstore, probably pacing, probably feeling guilty about texting me, probably drinking whatever tea she kept by the kettle to stay warm. I knew her apartment the way you know a place you care about more than you should. The kitchen window that stuck in cold weather. The bathroom light that flickered for 3 seconds before it steadied. The bookshelf organized in a system she insisted made sense but I could never decode. I knew where she kept her spare keys and that she left her phone face down on the counter when she was working because otherwise she'd lose an hour to it. I knew these things because I'd been paying attention, quietly, for almost 3 years. Around the 2-hour mark, I stopped at the one gas station on that stretch of road between the state line and Millbrook. The fluorescent lights gave everything the color of old teeth. I filled the tank, bought 2 coffees in paper cups too hot to hold, and sent her a text. "Still awake?" She responded in under 30 seconds. "Still awake? I'm in the corner of the couch with the camping blanket. Jake, it's really cold. Hour left. Hold on. You've been driving for 2 hours already. I'm aware. You're going to be exhausted tomorrow. Claire." "What?" "Stop making me feel guilty about coming." A pause. Then, "I'm trying to tell you I know this is a lot. I know you are. Stop worrying about me. I always worry about you. I held my phone for a second longer than necessary, standing in that cold parking lot. She always worried about me. Said it so casually, like it was just a fact about the world. And maybe it was. Maybe that's all it was. I got back in the truck and drove the final hour. Millbrook in January at 4 in the morning is one of the quietest places I've ever been. The town doesn't have a traffic light. The main street has a bakery, a hardware store, a diner, the bookstore, and a row of houses with wood smoke drifting from the chimneys. In summer it smells like cut grass and river water. In January it smells like cold stone and pine. I pulled up to the building and sat a moment looking at the light in her window, the kitchen light, that warm amber glow, and thought, there it is. That's the thing you can't explain to someone who hasn't felt it. The specific ache of seeing a light in a window and knowing it's hers. I called her instead of texting. She picked up on the first ring. I'm outside. I can hear your engine. A pause. Jake, yeah, thank you. Her voice was different on the phone than in person. Lower, somehow, like she'd stopped editing it. I'm coming down. She appeared at the side door in her coat over what looked like most of her wardrobe. Her hair down for once, a flashlight in one hand and my second paper cup of gas station coffee in her outstretched palm before I'd even gotten my toolbox out of the truck. I looked at her. She looked at me. She'd known I was coming for 3 hours, but she still looked a little like she couldn't quite believe I was there. The coffee's from 2 hours ago, I said. It's probably, I don't care. She held it with both hands against her chest like it was giving off heat, which maybe it was. Come inside, it's freezing. The apartment smelled like cold air and cedar from the candles she'd lit, probably to try to add some warmth in the corners. The camping blanket was bunched on the couch exactly where she'd described it. Her breath showed in the air when she exhaled. The thermostat on the wall read 51 degrees. I set my toolbox down and took off my jacket and held it out to her without thinking about it. She looked at it. Jake, just wear it while I figure out what we're dealing with. She put it on. It came to her thighs. She didn't say anything else about it. The furnace was in a closet off the hallway. An older forced air unit, probably 15 years old, the kind that's reliable until suddenly it isn't. I pulled out my flashlight and crouched down and started going through it systematically. Checked the filter, clogged, badly. Checked the pilot light, out. Checked the igniter, and there it was, a cracked igniter that had finally given out on one of the coldest nights of the year. I had one in the truck. I actually had one in the truck because I'd thrown a handful of common parts in at random before I left, the way you do when you don't know exactly what you're walking into. Claire stood in the hallway doorway behind me, still in my jacket, watching. How bad is it? She asked. Fixable. Cracked igniter. I have the part. You brought parts. I brought parts. A small quiet. Of course you did. It took me about 40 minutes. She made tea at some point and left a mug on the floor beside me without being asked. At one point she sat down cross-legged in the hallway, close enough to hold the flashlight steady for me when I needed both hands. She did it without being told, just reached over and took it and held it exactly where I needed it. I thought about saying something then. I almost did. Instead I focused on the fitting, on the angle of the wrench, on the specific satisfaction of a part sliding into place the way it's supposed to. When the furnace clicked on, that low thrum rising through the floor, that first push of warm air moving through the vents, Claire let out a sound I won't forget. Not dramatic, just quiet. Like she'd been holding something and finally set it down. There it is, I said. I heard her exhale. Oh, thank God. I turned off my flashlight and sat back against the closet doorframe. And we stayed like that for a moment, both listening to the heat starting to move through the apartment, the quiet machinery of warmth coming back to a cold place. Jake, she said. I could have called a repairman. I looked at her. In the dim light of the hallway, wearing my jacket over 3 sweaters, hair still down, mug of tea in her hands, her eyes were doing that thing they sometimes did. That thing where she was saying something on the surface but watching carefully to see how you responded to what was underneath it. You did, I said. She went very still. I hadn't planned to say it that way. Or maybe I had. Maybe I'd been driving toward it for 3 hours without quite knowing it. But it landed in the quiet hallway between us and I let it stay there. I didn't walk it back, I didn't make it into a joke. I just looked at her and let the words sit in the air with the sound of the furnace and the cold that was starting, very slowly, to pull back from the corners of the room. "What does that mean?" she asked. Her voice was careful. "It means you texted me. Not a repairman's number. Not a neighbor. Me, at 12:47 in the morning." I paused. "So I came." She looked down at her mug. "I didn't want to bother anyone," she said quietly. "I know that's what you think. It's true. It's also true that you have every HVAC company in the county saved in your contacts because you like to be prepared for exactly these situations. I know because you told me that yourself, about a year ago, when the hot water tank made a weird sound." She didn't respond right away. "And you texted me," I said. The furnace kept running. The warm air was starting to reach us now, the hallway less cold against my arms. She turned her mug around slowly in her hands, and I watched her work through something. I could see it happening, that particular stillness she got when she was being honest with herself about something she hadn't fully named yet. "It was late," she finally said. "I didn't want to call a stranger. I'm aware, Claire." I waited until she looked at me. "I'm aware of every reasonable thing you could say right now. I drove here anyway." Something moved across her face. Not a smile. Closer to the feeling before a smile, when something lands and the body knows it before the mind catches up. "Why do you do this?" she asked. Her voice was different now, quieter. "The drives, the moving boxes, the birthday thing last year when you showed up with, 'You drove here, Jake, just to bring me.'" She stopped, started again. "I keep thinking you'll stop. I know you do. Why haven't you?" I looked at my hands for a second. The knuckles still had a little grease on them from the igniter job. I'd been doing this, coming when she needed something, staying close enough to matter, far enough to be safe, for almost 3 years. I had spent a significant amount of that time convincing myself it was just friendship, just the way I was with people I cared about, just what you do. And maybe some of it was that, but not the whole of it. Never the whole of it. "Because I don't want to," I said. She blinked. That's not an answer." "Yeah, it is." I leaned my head back against the wall. "I drive 3 hours in January at 1 in the morning because I want to. Because when I saw your text, the first thing I thought wasn't 'it's late' or 'that's too far' or 'why didn't she call someone else?' The first thing I thought was that you were cold and I could fix it." She was quiet for a long time. "I used to think you were like this with everyone," she said finally. "I'm not." "I know." Another pause. "I think I've known for a while." The heat was fully on now, a steady flow from the vent at the base of the wall, and the apartment was warming in the way old apartments do. Slowly and unevenly, the corners still cold but the center starting to breathe again. She set her mug down on the floor and pulled my jacket tighter around herself, not because she was cold, I thought, but because of something else. Something closer to the thing neither of us had said out loud yet. "Daniel used to say I asked too much of people," she said. "That I leaned too hard." I felt something sharp and immediate. "That's not, Claire, that's not what this is." "I know it isn't." She said it quickly. "I know. That's not what I mean. I mean," she pressed her lips together, "I mean that after he said that I started being very careful about what I asked for, about who I texted, about I have the whole county in my contacts. Jake, I have a whole system, and you texted me anyway, and I texted you anyway." Her voice, on that last word, cracked just slightly at the edge. She smoothed it over fast, but I heard it. At 12:47 in the morning I looked at my phone, and I scrolled past every number I had saved and I texted you. And when you said you were on your way I felt. She stopped. "What did you feel?" She looked at the vent on the wall, at the dust moving in the warm air rising from it. At anything, it seemed, except me. "Safe," she said. The word came out small. I felt safe, which is, Jake, that hasn't happened in a long time, with anyone. Feeling safe in a moment where something was wrong and I didn't know how to fix it. I felt that, and then I felt terrified. Because what does it mean to feel that way about someone who has just been consistently, quietly there for 3 years? who drives 3 hours in the middle of the night and it doesn't even seem to cost him anything. It costs me something, I said. She stopped. It's not like it doesn't cost me anything. It costs me sleep. It costs me. I stopped, started again. Knowing something and choosing not to say it, for reasons that made sense at the time, that cost me something too. She turned her head and looked at me. You knew, she said. Not a question. For a while. How long is a while? I looked at her honestly. Since the wedding. The ink on your hand, the way you tilted your head. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Her eyes were bright in the dim hallway. Jake, that was almost 3 years ago. I know. You didn't say anything. You were with someone, and then I wasn't. And then you were grieving him. Even if he didn't deserve it. She was quiet. Then, softly. And then you moved 3 hours away, and every time I drove up here I thought about saying something, and every time I talked myself out of it, because you seemed like you were finally finding your footing. I didn't want to be the thing that complicated that. And then it just became habit. Coming here, being close enough to call without being honest. The furnace ran. The apartment was warm now, or getting there, the kind of warmth that comes back slowly and stays. She was looking at me with an expression I didn't have a clean name for. Something between wonder and recognition and something older than both. I don't want you to just be close enough to call, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. I could see them from here, where they rested on her knees, her fingers folded and tight. I don't want that to be what this is, because I don't think it's what this is. I think I've been pretending it was for a long time because it was easier than what? She met my eyes. Than wanting something I was afraid to want. I moved. Not dramatically, just shifted forward. Closed the few feet of hallway between us. Sat down close enough that when she turned toward me our knees were almost touching. She looked at me like she had the night she arrived in Millbrook after the move, standing in the middle of an empty apartment and suddenly understanding how real the change was. Like the size of something was just becoming clear. Claire. My voice came out rough at the edges. I drove 3 hours in January to fix your heater. That's either the act of a very good friend, it's not, she said, or it's the act of someone who has been in love with you for approximately 1,000 days and is bad at timing. She laughed. Just barely, and just for a second, but it was real. That laugh, the surprised kind, that sounded like exhaling after holding your breath too long. And then her eyes went wet at the corners, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment, like she was trying to hold something in. 1,000 days, she repeated. Give or take. Jake. Yeah, that's. She shook her head. Why didn't you just tell me? I told you. Bad timing. Every single day for 1,000 days was bad timing? Every single day for 1,000 days there was a reason. You were with someone. You were healing. You were just starting to feel like yourself again. You were building something. I didn't want to. I stopped. Looked at the vent, the warmth coming from it. I didn't want to be one more thing you had to deal with. One more person asking something of you when you were already running on empty. She stared at me. That's why, she said slowly. That's why you kept coming and never saying it. Because you thought saying it would be asking too much. Something like that. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. Not dramatic. Not a reaching, urgent thing. Just a hand set there, steady and deliberate. Her thumb moved once against the fabric of my flannel. Asking someone to love you back, she said, is not the same thing as asking too much. I looked at her hand on my arm. I know that now, I said quietly. Do you? I'm saying it out loud, aren't I? She made that sound again, almost a laugh, not quite. Her eyes were still bright. The apartment smelled like cedar and warm air and the memory of cold that had been driven out by something stubborn enough to return and stay. Outside the window, Millbrook was completely dark and completely still. That particular 4 a.m. stillness that feels like the world has stepped back to give you room. I've been thinking about you differently, she said, for a while. I didn't want to think about what that meant because you were the one consistent thing I had that I didn't want to risk. Does that make sense? Losing you as what you were was scarier than the idea of having you as something more. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I understand that. And then tonight happened. And then tonight happened. And I sat in the corner of my couch in 3 sweaters and I thought about calling a real service. And I thought about calling my neighbor Tom who has tools. And I thought about trying to figure it out myself with a YouTube video. And then I picked up my phone and there was your name and She pressed her lips together. I didn't even think about it. And that told me something. What did it tell you? She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on the main street, headlights sweeping brief and yellow through the curtains. The furnace ran. That I already know, she said. I reached up and put my hand over hers where it rested on my arm. She didn't pull away. We sat there for a moment in that way. 2 people in a warm hallway at 4 in the morning, with 3 years of careful, quiet history between them and something new starting to press against the inside of the room like warm air finding the last cold corner. I'm going to have terrible timing for the rest of my life, I said. I want you to know that up front. She laughed. A real one this time. Full and warm, and it reached her eyes. I know. You drove 3 hours and told me you loved me in a hallway next to a furnace closet at 4 in the morning. Technically, I haven't said loved. She raised an eyebrow. Jake, I'm being precise. Say the word. I looked at her. At the ink-stained woman from the wedding who tilted her head when she listened, who had moved 3 hours away and somehow stayed close anyway, who kept 3 sweaters on when it was cold and texted me instead of a repairman and felt safe when I showed up and was brave enough to say so. I love you, I said. She exhaled. Long and slow, and like she'd been waiting for it without knowing she was waiting. I love you too, she said. I have for a while. I just didn't know what to do with it. The first thing I did was move my hand from where it rested over hers and lift it to her face, careful and slow, and tuck the piece of hair that had fallen forward back behind her ear. She went very still. Then she leaned into my palm for just a moment, eyes closing, like something finally making contact with something it had been reaching toward for a long time. When I kissed her, it was soft and unhurried, the kind of kiss that isn't trying to prove anything. The furnace ran, the apartment was warm. Outside, Millbrook stayed dark and still, waiting for morning. She pulled back after a moment and looked at me, and she was smiling in a way I had never quite seen on her before. Not the careful smile she used in difficult conversations, not the polite smile she kept in reserve for clients she didn't like, the real one. The one that went all the way through. You should sleep, she said. You've been driving for 3 hours. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're exhausted and you have work tomorrow. Technically today, she winced. Jake, Claire. I smiled at her. I drove 3 hours to be here. I'm not in a hurry to leave. She looked at me for a moment. Then she stood up, still in my jacket, and held out her hand. I took it. The couch was narrow, but it didn't matter. She leaned against my shoulder, and the camping blanket she'd been huddled under alone ended up over both of us, which was a better arrangement by any measure. The apartment kept warming. Outside, the sky was beginning to change. Still dark, but with that first thin suggestion at the eastern edge, the gray that comes before blue. She fell asleep before I did. I knew the exact moment because her breathing changed and the tension went out of her shoulders all at once. I stayed still and thought about nothing in particular, about the drive up, about the cracked igniter, about her voice saying, "I can hear your engine," about 1,000 days of knowing something and choosing to say it in a hallway at 4 in the morning because I was finally tired of having bad timing on purpose. There's a version of this story where I never drove, where I found a repairman's number and sent it along with "You've got this" and went back to sleep. I've thought about that version, about how things might have stayed comfortable and careful. And I think in that version, comfortable and careful had quietly become another word for lonely. For both of us. There's no dramatic ending to this night. She slept. I watched the sky get light. Around 7, she stirred and woke up slowly and looked at me with the brief confusion of someone who had fallen asleep one way and woken up in a new world. "Hey," she said. "Hey." She looked at the window, at the light. "You stayed. I told you I wasn't in a hurry." She sat up, ran her hands through her hair, looked at the furnace closet door like she was still slightly amazed it had worked out. Then she looked at me, and I saw it again. That smile, the real one. "I'm going to make coffee," she said. "Okay? Real coffee. Not gas station coffee. That's a strong opening move." She laughed and stood up and padded toward the kitchen in her socks, still wearing my jacket. I watched her from the couch. The morning light through the bookstore window was pale gold, the kind that only happens in winter, and it caught the dust motes in the air and the title spines on her shelves and the corner of her face as she filled the kettle. I sat there in the warm apartment and I thought, this is it. This is the thing that happens after 1,000 days of being careful. Not fireworks. Not a dramatic declaration under the right lighting. Just coffee in a kitchen after a very long night. Just warmth that came back to a cold place. Just two people who finally stopped being afraid of the same thing at the same time. She looked up from the counter. "What are you smiling at?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. "The coffee." She gave me the look she usually reserved for clients who tried to change their design at the last minute. Then she turned back to the kettle and I kept smiling at nothing. At the ceiling, at the ordinary perfect fact of the morning. I called in late for work. Marcus asked no questions, just said, "Take the morning," and hung up with something in his voice that sounded like he'd been waiting for this call for approximately 1,000 days. I stayed until noon. We drank the real coffee and ate toast with the last of her bread, and she told me about the rebrand project she was working on for a small tea company she actually liked, which she said was rare. I told her about the office building job testing my patience for 6 weeks. We talked like we always had, easy. Except now there was also this. The way her fingers stayed on mine when she handed me my mug, the way I sat beside her instead of across from her, the specific warmth of two people who have stopped performing safety and started being it. When I finally stood up to go, she walked me down to the truck. Millbrook was awake now. The bakery was open, a woman was walking a dog down the main street, wood smoke still rising from the chimneys. She stood on the sidewalk in my jacket, arms crossed, squinting in the winter light. "You're going to call me when you get home," she said. "I'll text you. You're going to call me." "Yeah, okay, I'll call." She nodded like that was settled. Then she stepped up onto the running board of the truck and kissed me once, brief and certain, and stepped back down. "Drive safe," she said. "Always do." I got in the truck, started the engine. She stood there on the sidewalk in the January morning, my jacket around her shoulders, and watched me pull out. In the rearview mirror, she stayed there until I turned onto the main road. I kept looking back longer than I probably should have. This woman standing in front of a bookstore in a town 3 hours away who had texted me at midnight because she didn't know who else to text. "You did," I thought again. "You texted the right one." I drove home in the January light with the windows cracked and the cold air sharp on my face, and something changed loose in my chest, like a thing held tight for too long that had finally let go. The road was the same road. The state line was still where it had always been. The diner still sat at the edge of the curve, closed in the morning light. Everything was the same. Everything was different. My phone lit up on the seat beside me about 20 minutes in. A text. I waited until the next straightaway and glanced at it. "I'm still wearing your jacket." I smiled at the windshield. "Keep it," I typed at the next red light. "I'll get it next time." 3 dots. Then, next time. Then, after a pause. When is next time? I drove for a moment thinking about that. About the next time I'd make this drive. About how it had never once felt like a cost. About how 3 hours of dark highway felt completely different now than it had 12 hours ago, which seemed impossible and also exactly right. This weekend I typed, "If you want." Her response came back in seconds. "I want." And honestly, that was enough. That was the whole thing, right there in 6 letters. 3 years of careful and quiet and knowing without saying, and in the end it came down to a broken heater and a woman who texted me instead of a repairman and a hallway where I finally stopped having bad timing on purpose. She wanted. I drove. That's how the rest of our story started. Not with a perfect moment under perfect lighting, but with frozen pipes and a cracked igniter and cold breath visible in the dark. And somewhere in all of that, the simple stubborn truth that some people just know who to call. And if you've ever been the person someone reaches for at midnight, not because you're easy, not because you're convenient, but because when everything goes cold and quiet and something breaks, your name is the one that comes up first, then you already know what I mean. You already know it's not about the drive. It's about the fact that you go.